Hello everyone! Today we're diving into one of the most classified and perhaps most absurd chapters of World War II. Forget everything you know about traditional battles, roaring cannons, and heroic charges. Imagine an entire army fighting not with lead and steel, but with rubber, paint, and giant loudspeakers. Sounds unbelievable? This was the famous Ghost Army, a unit that fooled Hitler himself and saved thousands of lives without firing a single shot. Get ready to discover how imagination became the most powerful weapon on the battlefield. Let's get started. Imagine this. It's 1944 in the fields of France, and two American soldiers are effortlessly lifting a massive 30-ton Sherman tank over their heads. Panicked German intelligence reports the arrival of an entire armored division, never suspecting that all this might is held together by nothing but rubber and compressed air. Meet Arthur Shilstone, a talented artist whose combat mission wasn't to destroy the enemy, but to create a perfect illusion. He served in the secret 23rd Headquarters Special Troops, where 1,100 designers, actors, and sound engineers turned the front line into a stage for the most dangerous play in history. Today, we'll tell the story of how the Ghost Army saved thousands of lives, fighting with nothing but inflatable decoys and giant speakers. For the deception to work, the inflatable decoys had to look flawless, even to experienced German reconnaissance pilots. Artists in the unit, like Bill Blass, used special paints to give the rubber surfaces the texture of cold, heavy metal. They even simulated tank tracks on the ground using real tractors, making empty fields look as if an armored column had just passed through. But the Ghost Army didn't just stand still. The soldiers staged entire performances in nearby towns, wearing fake patches from various divisions. They would walk into local bars and accidentally let slip secret plans, knowing that enemy spies were bound to be among the locals. While the inflatable tanks created the appearance of power by day, the true magic of deception began at dusk, when the sound engineers took over. Sergeant Victor Dowd and his team used massive 500-pound recorders, preloaded with sounds capable of terrifying any veteran, from the clanging of bridge construction to the heavy roar of tank engines. These recordings were broadcast through colossal 500-watt speakers mounted on trucks, projecting the sound of entire divisions moving over 20 kilometers away, forcing the Germans to frantically redeploy reserves to empty forests. To seal the victory, the masters of the airwaves stepped in, radio operators who created phantom communication networks, mimicking the unique fist or typing style of real operators whom German intelligence had known for years. They wrapped the enemy in a dense cocoon of fake orders, soldier complaints about the weather, and fuel requests, convincing Hitler that a decisive strike was being prepared right under his nose. All this work required nerves of steel. The Ghost Army often operated just a few kilometers from the actual front line, risking destruction by real artillery due to their own stage sets. In March 1945, the Ghost Army received the most dangerous order in its history. They had to impersonate 2 full divisions, totaling 30,000 men, right under the noses of the Germans entrenched across the Rhine. While the real troops secretly prepared for a crossing 10 miles to the south, Arthur Shilstone and his comrade Bernie Mason found themselves on the very front lines, armed with nothing but rubber, paint, and their own courage. Bernie Mason later recalled how they spent the entire night setting up hundreds of inflatable tanks and trucks in the fog, trying not to give themselves away with any unnecessary noise, as German patrols were literally on the other side of the river. The risk was extreme. If the Germans had realized that what stood before them was not a formidable army, but a stage set, they could have wiped out the unit with a single artillery barrage or a swift counterattack. Arthur Shilstone said that the hardest part was bringing the camp to life. Soldiers had to conspicuously light fires, hang laundry, and make noise to attract enemy intelligence, putting themselves directly in the line of fire. At one point, Bernie noticed German Messerschmitt scout planes circling directly over their positions, and his heart skipped a beat. The pilots were flying so low they could have noticed the rubber gun barrels swaying in the wind. To save the situation, Bernie and the other men began to mimic panicked activity, rolling out anti-aircraft guns, which were actually just painted pipes, to convince the pilots the threat was real. Meanwhile, through the giant speakers set up by Sergeant Dowd, the deafening roar of pontoon bridges being built echoed across the water, keeping German generals awake with fear. The deception worked so perfectly that the German artillery unleashed its full fury on empty fields in inflatable decoys, while the main Allied forces crossed the Rhine elsewhere with almost no resistance. When the operation ended, Bernie Mason looked at the shrapnel-riddled remains of his rubber tanks and realized this performance had just saved the lives of 10,000 American boys who wouldn't even know who they owed their lives to. When the war in Europe ended, the soldiers of the Ghost Army returned home, but unlike other veterans, they couldn't tell their friends or even their closest loved ones about their heroic deeds. The U.S. government classified the activities of the 23rd Unit as top secret, a status that remained in place for over 50 years, turning a real story into a forgotten shadow. Arthur Shilstone returned to civilian life and became one of America's most sought-after illustrators, working for giants like National Geographic. But for decades, no one knew that his finest works were those inflatable tanks in France. Bernie Mason often recalled those nights by the Rhine, when his life hung by a thread because of a piece of rubber, but he was forced to remain silent until the secret archives were finally opened in 1996. It was only half a century later that the world learned this group of artist soldiers had participated in over 20 major operations, saving the lives of an estimated 15,000 to 30,000 people. In 2022, justice finally prevailed. The surviving veterans of the unit, including those we spoke of today, were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal, the highest civilian honor in the United States. The story of the Ghost Army teaches us that in war, victory goes not only to the one with more shells, but to the one with the imagination and courage to turn a lie into salvation. Arthur Shilstone lived a long and vibrant life, leaving behind thousands of paintings, but until the very end, he considered his greatest masterpiece to be that very performance he staged in the face of death. Next time you see footage of grand World War II battles, remember the people who fought with brushes and speakers, the ghosts who changed the course of history. The story of the Ghost Army is a powerful reminder that history is written not only by those who held the most powerful weapons, but by those who had the courage to use their creativity to protect life. If you found the bravery of Arthur Shilstone, Bernie Mason, and their fellow artists as inspiring as I did, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. It helps us bring more of these incredible, forgotten stories to light. Now, I want to hear from you. If you had to hide an entire army with nothing but art supplies, what would be your masterpiece of deception? Let's discuss it in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the most effective way to win a war is to never fire a single shot. See you in the next story.